both in the UK and the US, the media, it has become largely the left and perhaps even drives the agendas and narrative in the government. The media is so powerful. The FBI has been weaponized by the left government and how they went after a sitting president, even eavesdropping illegally on the president in the White House. When you see how conservatives have been targeted by our Department of Justice and FBI, you can see that the federal government, the IRS included, has been weaponized against half of the American people.
Hello and welcome to Reasoned UK. I'm your host, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Today I'm elated to bring you a riveting discussion that peels back the curtain on the rarely discussed but significantly influential roles within the political sphere. Now, before we delve into all of that, if you appreciate this content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give us a like. Your subscribe keeps the conversation and conservatism going. Now, I have the distinct pleasure of sitting down right now with the formidable Carla Sands, a former US ambassador to Denmark, whose tenure was marked by staunch advocacy for energy security and a keen eye on the behind-the-scenes workings of politics, of course. Now, her international perspective and unyielding stand on various issues, a true patriot, have made her a very noteworthy figure in the US political arena indeed. Now, our tete-a-tete today is set to cover a whole host of issues, from the civil service to the under-the-radar influence of non-elected officials like ambassadors and foreign secretaries, but also digging into that really crucial issue that we in Britain know all too well, but the other Western nations do too. The enduring debate on energy security, especially post-Ukraine, that's really brought it into focus. The net zero conversation that has actually developed over the past year, and I want Carla Sands' opinion and global outlook that'll actually guide us through this issue and what the United Kingdom and the West need to actually do when it comes to the environment and environmentalism. Now, she doesn't shy away from domestic concerns either, so we'll be exploring things like the alarming literacy rates in the West, people reading and writing, folks, it's a real problem, the essence of social mobility, why capitalism, conservatism are the best vehicles for that, and how Ambassador Sands navigated the ideological labyrinth in her dealings with Denmark, especially when it comes to oil interests with Russia. And don't forget Brexit, folks. Ambassador Sands is a big Brexiteer, which I know many of you at home will love. And of course, that means a big fan of Nigel Farage. So we'll get on to a bit of that as well. So without further ado, folks, let's delve into the heart of the matters there discussed with Ambassador Carla Sands. Ambassador Sands, thank you very much for your time today.
Darren, it's so happy to talk to you. I'm so happy to talk to you.
Thank you. Now, in light of recent occurrences in Britain, now I know obviously you're not British, you won't have that much of an opinion on everything going on here, the madness that has consumed British politics over recent years. But we had a former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who you know and have heard of. She, of course, was thrown out by what some would deem to be the financial markets. Now, there was also the civil service, right, with civil servants saying we can't do this, we can't do that. And the whole Sue Gray with Boris Johnson, she's gone off to work for the Labour Party. She was, for those who don't know, a senior civil servant who investigated the former Prime Minister and came out with a damning report and has now gone off to work for the opposition. Do you think, Carla, that we should be more like America in Britain and actually bring in people who believe in the mission of the leader or the party that actually won office?
Well, I think that there's something noble in having the civil servants who serve at the pleasure of the government that's in power. And most of the Western world has that set up. The problem in America is that our civil servants who were originally hired to be servants of the people and expected to have a little less salary than the average American in exchange for some benefits that not every American working person had. Flash forward, they're now unionized and at a higher rate than any other industry, I think, in America. And they make more money, substantially more than the average American. maybe double almost. And then they have job security. And if you look at the zip codes that are rich in the United States, the richest are really where our civil servants live now. And Vivek Ramaswamy, believe it or not, just did a conference at America First Policy Institute, and he cited in our founding documents where the President of the United States is commanded to have control of the employees working for him, so that no employee in the federal government is working in opposition to whoever the president's agenda is. As long as it's constitutional, they're there to implement the president's policies, and that is explicit in the documents. And he says that we must enforce that no matter who is president.
Yeah, the whole it's become an industry in and of itself, hasn't it? And actually, there is a pervasive left-wing narrative in much of the civil service. I don't think that's unique to Britain, right? Why do you think it is that actually we end up with those who are opposed to conservative policies in position of such influence when it comes to the carrying out of said policies?
Well, I think both in the UK and the US, the media, it has become largely the left, and perhaps even drives the agendas and narrative in the government. The media is so powerful and persuasive, and I will just put most big tech in with media. So it's now become almost another branch of governing. And no one wants to get on the wrong side of popular opinion, the media, be someone who's despised in civil society. And so there has been a trend to move further and further left. If you look back at the FBI working to root out communism, whether you like that or not, just 70 years ago, and then you look at today, what the FBI has been how the FBI has been weaponized by the left government, and how they went after a sitting president, even eavesdropping illegally on the president in the White House. When you see how conservatives have been targeted by our Department of Justice and FBI, you can see that the federal government, the IRS included, has been weaponized against half of the American people. And so you can imagine, if you're a civil servant, do you really want to be abused, or do you want to go along and go with the union way? And not that, listen, I'm not opposed to unions or union members, but I'm just saying the civil servant union is, like some other unions, pretty far left.
Yeah, we have exactly the same problem. Now, I mentioned at the start there your firm belief, and I think that's a fair assessment on fossil fuels, for example. How would you reconcile that with a younger voter, for example, that's coming through very left wing, very environmentally conscious? And what are your thoughts on actually achieving energy security without unsettling residents? Because, for example, in this country, the fracking debate is all but shut down, Carla, which America actually managed to reduce its carbon emissions thanks to the extraction of shale gas. So why is it, and how is it, that we can bring about a debate that's more sensible, measured and nuanced perhaps than the hysteria and alarmism that you hear right now?
Yes, our economy has roared multiples ahead, while our carbon emissions have dropped about, I think, 40% during the same period. It's largely natural gas. In the United States, 85% of our energy comes from some form of fossil fuels, and we use them responsibly. We're highly regulated. Most of the Western world is, but the United States harvests and moves and refines our fossil fuels cleaner than anywhere else in the world. And we're going to be using fossil fuels for the next 100 years at least, and we're never going to run out of them. The fact is that the young people, I agree with them. We have to take care of the environment. We want clean water, clean air, clean soil. We want to take care of our planet. It's our home. But they've been lied to. Sadly, the young people and many middle and older people have been told that there's global warming and that it's a catastrophe, and that every storm that happens is because of mankind and our activities. And it's not true. There is there are many reasons why we have changes in the weather in the world, why we have heating and cooling periods, ice ages, and warmer times, both from the heat from the seas, from changes in the sun activity and the moon. There are a lot of natural causes. And even if all of the people in the UK and the US stopped driving and flying today, there would be really no measurable change in any temperature in the world. And the young people probably haven't been told that the things that they've been told are good, like windmills and solar power, those materials are so polluting, and they're often made by slave labor, whether in China or in the Congo
Yeah.
with child slaves. And also that if they decide to drive an electric vehicle, it's actually more polluting and dirtier to drive for the first 15 years than a clean combustion engine car.
I mean, absolutely right, because I can remember in through recent history, through my lifetime, we were told that driving diesel cars was environmentally friendly, and now, of course, we're told that driving diesel cars is responsible for emitting poison into the atmosphere, in cities especially, and all the rest of it. We were told burning wood pellets was renewable, when, of course, actually you're chopping down vast swathes of forestry and all the rest of it in order to do this. Now, that's not in what I have in my head as a vision of an environmentalist policy. So all of these things have just been shown to actually have either unintended consequences or actually not serve the purpose that we were told they were going to do. And Carla, every single time it has been the working class who have suffered the most as a consequence.
Yeah, it's true. The working people are the ones that both in the UK and the US are really suffering under the inflation and the high energy prices. People died in London last year because they were cold.
Yeah.
The prices went so high. Some people said, "Well, I'm not going to heat my home then. I can't afford to." And then they passed away. It's if we have a cold winter, we're going to have that happen again. Remember that Russian gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, was being built to bypass Ukraine and continue to power Europe. Germany was the driver, right, in that.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was the ambassador to Denmark, I worked with the White House and the Danish government to block that Nord Stream 2, the Russian gas pipeline. The only place it was never finished was my area of responsibility. But there were others, for instance, the Germans, that would be very vitriolic and angry about us using clean natural gas from our own country, but they were funding and building Nord Stream 2, the Russian gas pipeline, which now that Europe and the UK isn't going to have gas from there, I hope they will wake up and do the hydraulic fracturing, which is clean and sustainable and will give you your own power from your own country, which gives you economic security and I think national security as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you ask me, in the name of national security, we should be exhausting absolutely every option available to us. And that includes extracting everything from the North Sea, for example, to actually ensure that we have energy security. Because until you have energy security, you don't have security of the realm.
That's right. In fact, in the state of New York, which you might say has a lot of similarities to the UK, gets a little chilly in the winter, they have banned most hydraulic fracturing in the state, but in my home state of Pennsylvania, they allow it. And they told me last week that New York has lost $15 billion dollars a year to their GDP by banning hydraulic fracturing. But even at the beginning of the Ukraine war, they were importing Russian gas to heat their homes. So rather than use their own clean, sustainable energy, they would rather import, it's unbelievable, Russian gas.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely extraordinary. And I mean, you've mentioned there, hit on a key point, which is, of course, Ukraine and geopolitics. Now, the US, the United States, there's been a lot of rhetoric recently around the Americans' diminished role on the world stage under President Joe Biden. Now, do you actually, first of all, do you recognize those sentiments? Do you share those sentiments? And secondly, what do you think the United States' role is? Because you mentioned a few political candidates so far that are actually vying for a certain slot on the presidency. And candidates have been torn, I think it's safe to say, Carla, on what America's role should be on the world stage. I wonder what your opinion is on that.
Well, Darren, I think that the world is safer because we are such a great military power. The world's safer if we have a strong executive in the White House. Under President Trump's leadership, we had no new foreign wars. ISIS was defeated. We had the Abraham Accords that was the beginning of peace in the Middle East. We had four different countries come out and do trade and cooperation agreements with Israel and normalize relations, open diplomatic outposts. So we know that the world benefits from a strong executive. And today we have, I'm sorry to say it, but a weak and corrupt president. Corrupt, meaning we're now in danger from China, from Russia, from Iran, saber rattling, and then the attack by Hamas, which is enabled by Iran, the number
Yeah.
one state of terror in the world, on Israel and attempting to draw us into the conflict. China has publicly stated that they would like to see us in four diversionary wars. And then I think that's when they move on Taiwan. That's my personal opinion at this moment, with what I know, which I don't have a security clearance right now. So I only know by looking at open source information. But you can listen to what the leaders in China say, both military and Xi Jinping himself. And then you can see their alliance with Russia, both in very powerful trade agreements and also defense agreements, and how China has come up behind Iran and even said supportive comments about Hamas. And so it's not unlikely that some kind of scenario like that is true.
Yeah. And on that, the issue of Denmark and Russian oil, in particular, the area in which you were very, very hands-on and involved, there were ideological disparities, I think it's safe to say. How did you manage to actually engage with individuals who may think oil is the Satan, that there are some people who are really, really quite strong and robust on these. Dare I say, a little teenage truant in the form of Greta Thunberg has some opinions on issues like that. She's not Danish, of course, but and then you've got issues on the other side of the argument where people say, like we do, that actually we need oil, our own oil, to be energy secure and not be dependent on Russia and other foreign actors, for example. So all of these things, how do you bridge divides like that? How do you actually have conversations in a bipartisan manner on subjects of such importance and controversy?
Right. When someone is a religious zealot, it is hard to have open dialogue with them and be able to convince them of something different, right? So here's what I'll say about it. Darren, Greta Thunberg just came out and said she supports Palestine, and
Mm,
it was a very political statement. I think that her statement shows that she's just a leftist hack. And when it came to talking to the Danes, they're great people, but it's a tiny country. And if they want to get to so-called net zero, I think they can. But they're also importing American wood pellets. I mean, we love trade, but wood pellets do pollute the earth, right? It's not that clean. So I think that it's hard to talk, like I said, to a religious zealot to convince them that there is actually nothing to support their claims. Of course, we want clean air, and Denmark is, they're. I think that it's part of their brand that they have built a brand around the companies that make the windmills. That they use a lot of heat from the ground, and they're they're very proud of their green zealotry, I'll say.
yeah.
But I heard Her Majesty the Queen come out after one of those screeds that someone said at the Queen's Day a few years ago when she had diplomats to the palace. And she said, I think we need to slow down a little bit and we need to make sure we have energy. If you see how some countries have reversed course, Norway, for instance, and others, I think that a middle way of continuing to innovate new forms of energy. If you look at hydrogen, there's so much innovation going on. You look at the idea of hybrid cars that have some petroleum in them, but also have a battery. There are ways to bridge this period, which I think is going to take decades to make this transition, whatever it is. And we should be thoughtful about it. Make sure that we're thinking about the well being of our citizens, that they're warm and cozy in their homes, that they can afford to run their businesses, put gas in their car or petrol, if you like, when they want to go somewhere, that they can afford to live their lives, and we don't jack up the prices because we're suppressing energy and causing it to be a more expensive commodity. If you put human flourishing first and then move on from there, if that is the mandate, is how can we help human beings flourish and do well and prosper and be safe and have energy, and then you move out from there. I think that would be the most humane position.
I couldn't agree more. Very well said. An issue that I did want to touch with you would be actually the decline, I guess, of the Western world, not just thanks to Joe Biden, but the literacy, for example, math and English literacy rates in the West, across the West, are actually pretty concerning, are they not? Well, apart from if you compare the United Kingdom with the United States of America, for example, certain states are doing actually really quite well in comparison. In your opinion, how do we actually address the core and pivotal issue of social mobility? Because social mobility is one of the key arguments of making the case for capitalism, is it not?
It totally is. And I've been reading in the Financial Times for some time now that UK has a problem with maths. That's what it keeps
We
saying.
do.
We have a problem with maths in the UK. We, in some of our states and cities, have a problem also with math and reading. And we know if we're going to compete on the global stage, right? I mean, we're all countries and economies are competing. We don't want a compliant, stupid population. We want a high achieving, well educated population. And it's not that hard to do. The mandate should be educate the kids, put good teachers in, reward them for good work, get rid of the bad ones, make sure that the kids in the lowest economic rings of the ladder get a great education because that's their opportunity to just soar and fulfill their God-given potential. So I agree. I think we should stop indoctrinating children. I think it should be illegal to teach them to hate each other, which is happening here in the US with the critical race theory being
Yeah.
taught in schools, the diversity, equity, inclusion, which is actually Marxism by another name, and just say that we're going to honor our Constitution, which is that all men are created equal, and just start from there, and that everybody is going to have a different path. Different people are going to achieve different things, but let's give them the wings to achieve all that they can.
Now, finally, I must get your opinion on this because so many of our viewers are massive Brexiteers. Now,
Okay.
what are your reflections on the UK and Brexit in general, especially considering that I think, Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a certain admiration for a Mr. Nigel Farage.
I do. And the fact that he was debanked is just so outrageous.
It
I
is.
can't believe the weapons that are being used. It's happening here in the US. That's why we don't want a digital currency because of the power that will have. And we can see examples where in communist China, some people can't get a mortgage or travel because of them being in disfavor with the regime. I was in favor of Brexit because borders matter and because sovereign nations should have their sovereignty. I understand trade unions and organizing around trade and markets, open markets. I get that. We want more trade. But like for instance, in the United States, under the current president, he has opened our border to terrorists, to military age men. In the last 2 weeks here in October, we have had 2,000 military age Chinese men apprehended, and we only get 60% of the border crossers. So I'm very worried that ISIS and Hamas, China, that other terrorist organizations, including cartel members, have been able to infiltrate our country and potentially could plan a terror act or weaken us at the moment when China would take action against Taiwan or another country. So I think that we are living in the United States the most dangerous times. Under President Trump, we had the quietest border in 40 years.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it's an issue that we have at our southern border as well. Actually, the same on both sides. Apart from, we're supposed to be, Carla, an island nation, and yet for some reason we can't turn back some boats. It's just strikes most of us as completely baffling and really frustrating, actually. And I think that's me putting it mildly, I must say, because I
Yeah.
think I could use some more, shall we say, fruitful language than that particular sentence. But what is it about Nigel Farage that you like so much? Because of course, the President Trump used to refer to Nigel as Mr. Brexit, and Nigel has been to the US, spoken to a lot of people. He's a big friend of the US. What is it that you like so much about him? And wish, I guess, and I don't wish to put words into your mouth, that actually the United Kingdom could maybe do with a few more politicians like that.
Well, I want to give a disclaimer. I don't know that much about UK politics or about Nigel Farage, but I do know him personally. I do admire him. I think he's an example that one person can make a huge difference in a country because I believe that his patient advocacy for Brexit, the idea, I got chills thinking about it, that a nation should be sovereign and make its own laws, and that the people should have a voice in the laws of their own nation. What a concept. He was able, by talking to the people over and over again, to really make it happen. I mean, of course, it took millions of people helping, but I believe that he was like God's hands in that. And I admire him for that. And that does show you the power of an individual.
It absolutely does. And we like the power of the individual at this side of the political fence. So, Ambassador Carla Sands, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll have to catch up soon.
Thanks, Darren. Great to
You got
talk
what
to
it
you.
takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.